Howdy, welcome to String 'em Up. My name's Dave Holland, and today I'd like to introduce a new segment to the channel. Now, so far, the vast majority of content has been instruction-based, and that's great because that's always been my principal goal. Now, in my introduction video, I mentioned that I'd like to use the channel to open up some performances, discussions, debates, advice, etc., in addition to the lesson-based content. Now, I've already tried to broaden the channel scope by introducing some occasional performance clips, and more are on the way in a new series which will be called Live from the Stairwell, by the way, so look out for that. So this brings us to this video. Now, this video will be the first of some top 10 lists of my favorite music-related topics. Now, I'll be honest, I feel a little funny about doing top 10 lists since everyone else does them. However, a few days ago in a private lesson, I ended up recommending several guitarists to a new improviser who asked me who my early playing influences were. So there I was in a lesson reciting a list of my favorites. And you know what? If it works in a lesson, well, it should work on the channel. So just a quick note about my lists. Now, these are going to be lists of players, bands, albums, etc., which have influenced my playing, writing, guitar tone, technique, or are just some of my favorites all the way back to childhood. These are not top 10 best lists. And also I'd like to know what everyone else's favorites are, so feel free to use these videos as a conversation starter. So here we go with my first top 10 list. These are my 10 favorite rock bands. So number 10, Crack the Sky. Now, I'm betting that most of you have never heard of Crack the Sky, but originally they were formed in West Virginia, and they were thought to be the next big thing in the mid-70s. Matter of fact, Rolling Stone magazine even named their self-titled record debut album of the year in 1975. Proggy, poppy, and hard rocking, fans of Rush, the Beatles, and Led Zeppelin should find plenty to love about their first three albums. Crack the Sky, Animal Notes, and my favorite, Safety in Numbers. Now, some Crack the Sky tunes to look out for. My favorites are the grand symphonic multi-movement works like Nuclear Apathy, Ice, and A Sea Epic. But songs like A Night on the Town with Snow White, I still think that's a brilliant title, Lighten Up McGraw, and We Want Mine really showcase their slightly tongue-in-cheek approach to serious hard-rocking music. And by the way, you can find their entire discography on Spotify. Number 9, AC/DC. Now, there's a part of me that's disappointed in myself for ranking AC/DC at 9, but that's just how the numbers worked out. I'm not really sure what to say other than the Bon Scott era AC/DC albums are, to me, like eating a big bowl of macaroni and cheese. They're just total comfort food. High Voltage, 74 Jailbreak, and If You Want Blood, You've Got It are three of the first albums that I began learning songs from. In fact, at one point in high school, I could play every song off of High Voltage and Jailbreak pretty much note for note. In fact, here recently, I've been relearning some of those solos, so that ought to tell you something. My favorite Brian Johnson era album would have to be Flick of the Switch, and of course, For Those About to Rock. What a monster album. So what's my favorite AC/DC tune? Well, I'm not really sure, but COD, Little Lover, and Can I Sit Next to You come instantly to mind. Number 8, Led Zeppelin. I love Led Zeppelin. In fact, one of the things that really impressed me when I first met my wife is that she also loved Zeppelin. And I knew then that she was a keeper, so that's good. Physical Graffiti, this one, Led Zeppelin 2 and Houses of the Holy are probably my three favorites. I've always been a fan more of the deep cuts, things like Night Flight, Your Time Is Gonna Come, Houses of the Holy, The Lemon Song, and Carousel Ombra are all songs that really stand out to me. Now, obviously, Jimmy Page gave me some of my first lessons in the riff. He gave everybody that lesson. Now, there are others, but he was the first. Zeppelin was also the first group to show me the importance of a monster rhythm section. And you know what? So much has already been said of John Bonham, so I won't beat that dead horse. But John Paul Jones never gets the praise he's due. He's equal parts James Jamerson, Willie Dixon, and Paul McCartney. And if you're skeptical, listen to the Lemon Song, or you can find the isolated tracks to ramble on online. Those two tunes are absolute eye openers. Oh, yeah, one more thing, Robert Plant. 7. Rush. The summer between high school and my first year of college introduced me to Rush. Now, I had heard them on the radio before, but a friend loaned me an armful of Rush records that summer, and everything changed. Now, by this time, I'd been studying classical guitar for about 2.5 years, and I already had good technique. I knew a lot of theory, and I knew about odd times, so I was absolutely primed for this. I remember trying to learn the Red Barchetta off of this album, Moving Pictures. It was a struggle, but I did a pretty good job, except for the guitar solo, because I just couldn't figure out what made Alex Lifeson tick at that point. Now, my biggest problem with Rush is that I'd listened to an entire album dozens and dozens of times before I ever actually heard the music, because I was always so obsessed with counting the record. And I never got to enjoy the music until I understood the rhythms. Favorite songs have always been the Red Barchetta off of Moving Pictures, Jacob's Ladder, Bytor and the Snow Dog, La Via Strangiato, Xanadu, and New World Man. Number 6, Van Halen. Well, of course Van Halen's going to be on the list. Now, I've never been a shredder, so I can't really say Eddie Van Halen has ever been a direct influence on my soloing, but Eddie has always been a source of inspiration as far as songwriting and creativity are concerned. And the big thing that always impressed me about Van Halen is that they always sounded like a band, never just a rhythm section supporting a hot guitarist, vocalist act. Also, few rock bands have really understood the importance of vocal harmonies the way that Van Halen did. There was always something organic about the David Lee Roth era that disappeared with later lineups of the group. What's my favorite Van Halen album? Well, hands down, it's Fair Warning. I couldn't find my vinyl copy of Fair Warning, so I do have Women and Children First. But I spent many hours night fishing, tight lining for cats with Fair Warning in my Walkman. Now, Van Halen 2 also is a very special album to me. I mean, just think about it. Light Up the Sky, Out of Love Again, and Bottoms Up are amazing examples of a band firing on all cylinders. Rest in peace, Eddie. Number 5, The Beatles. Now, I know it's almost expected for the Beatles to be at number 1, and depending on the day, I would sometimes argue that they are my favorite. In fact, this whole list can get pretty fluid at any given time. So what's left to be said about the Beatles? Well, there's not much really, but let me say this. I teach about 25 to 30 private students a week during the school year, many of them grade school and middle school age. And to this day, I'm still amazed at how many of those students ask to learn Beatles tunes. And when you consider that their first singles were released in the United States almost 60 years ago, this fact alone guarantees them the distinction of the greatest rock band ever. Not only that, remember that the Beatles taught us how to write rock songs as something more than just, as Frank Zappa would have said, teenage music. This one is absolutely one of my favorites, Meet the Beatles. And you know, as far as I'm concerned, the Beatles' writing influence is so massive and omnipresent that no one has really been able to break their songwriting mold. Now, some amazing writers like Liz Phair, Jeff Buckley, Hwang So-yoon, Tori Amos, Black Francis, and Kate Bush have bent that mold up pretty violently, but no one's broken it. Yet. Number 4, Kiss. Let me tell you a little story. I guess I was 5.5 years old. I woke up around midnight one night to go to the bathroom. The lights and the TV were on in the living room, but my dad, who's a night owl, had apparently already gone to bed. So I went to the living room to turn off the lights and the TV, and there it was. Kiss's in-concert TV performance. Now, I had started reading about the time I turned 4, and my dad would always bring home Spider-Man, Batman, and other superhero and science fiction comics. Of course, as I got older, I actually found out that my dad used me as cover so he could read the comics. So by this time, I was already well versed in what superheroes and aliens were. And here on the TV was a bunch of superheroes and aliens who had formed a rock band. Needless to say, my brain melted on the spot and I was all in. Now, for my 7th birthday, my Uncle Bob bought me Love Gun, and it all went downhill from there. The first song I ever learned, I was 8 and had a cheap global acoustic. That was Kiss's cover of And Then She Kissed Me. Now, in middle school, when I got my first decent electric, the Kiss 6-pack, the first 6 records, made up the bulk of my bedroom play-along repertoire. And to this day, Kiss is still a huge part of my life. There is my Kiss lamp back there. And as a matter of fact, since the beginning of 2022, I've been relearning several of Ace's solos note for note. Now, for those of you who might dismiss his abilities as a guitarist, there's really a lot to unpack in his playing. And here's something else to consider. Gene Simmons is a criminally underrated bassist, especially on the 6-pack records. In a lot of ways, his early bass lines are equal parts James Jamerson, Paul McCartney, and John Paul Jones. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. This is Kiss Alive, which is one of the great live albums of all time. And of course, we all know what Kiss looks like. Also, if you watch the 1975 Winterland concert, for that 70 minutes, Paul Stanley was the greatest frontman ever. Number 3, Iron Maiden. My introduction to Iron Maiden came late. I discovered them with the album Power Slave, and boy, did it ever do a number on me. By this time, I had already been listening to Kiss, Aerosmith, Judas Priest, Zeppelin, and Sabbath for a while. And while those groups mentally prepared me for Maiden, I really wasn't ready for them. I was already a Sabbath freak by this point, so Maiden's intensity wasn't particularly surprising. It was their velocity. Back in the Village simply throttled me. And to this day, I still consider the Power Slave, Somewhere in Time, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son album arc as the greatest, most comprehensive set of music in all metal. Those 3 records are just eat up with what, again, Frank Zappa called conceptual continuity. Now, my favorite Maiden tunes would have to be The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Transylvania, The Nomad, Passchendaele, Alexander the Great, The Clairvoyant, and The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. I tend to favor the more epic long-form Maiden tunes. And, of course, this is one of the great Iron Maiden Live After Death from the World Slavery Tour in 84 and 85. By the way, as I sat down to write this list, I happened to be listening to the album Melissa by Merciful Fate, and I hadn't heard it for years, and I was struck at how deep Maiden's influence was on that, and of course, lots of other albums. Final thought, if you want to look cool at a gig, wear a Maiden shirt. Number 2, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Now, I'm not sure how to even proceed with Frank. His legacy is almost too extensive to address, so I already know this entry will be deficient. Now, Frank's probably my favorite guitarist ever, but because this is a list of favorite bands, I'm going to focus more on the Mothers side of things. Now, if you're not familiar with the Mothers, their performances can be absolutely chaotic free jazz explorations, doo-wop, heavy rock, gut bucket blues, or fully scored modern chamber music, often in the same song by the same group. Frank's ideas were, let's say, unconventional. Now, probably the most impressive thing about the Mothers is that any incarnation of the group could be made up of virtuoso classical musicians like Ruth and Ian Underwood, musically illiterate bar band veterans like Motorhead Sherwood, Jimmy Carl Black, and jazz and blues heavyweights like George Duke, Chester Thompson, and Ernie Watts. And their dedication to realizing Frank's vision was really singular. However, musician burnout was not uncommon, and there could be a high turnover rate within the group, which led to several celebrated incarnations of the Mothers, each with its own group personality. Frank's songs were often witty, sardonic, offensive, but always tongue-in-cheek, even when speaking brutal truth. Now, throughout the Mothers' tenure, Frank's solos developed from blues-based surf-type lines to ferocious jazz fusion and virtuosic hard rock. And because there are so many Mothers albums, it's possible to actually track Frank's development as a player from the early years to the later years if you set aside some time to listen in chronological order. Now, some essential Mothers records, Overnight Sensation and Apostrophe, this one, which are actually Frank Zappa records, but it's the Mothers. Another one, One Size Fits All, Absolutely Free, and just another band from LA. And of course, their debut album, Freak Out. Number 1, Black Sabbath. No matter what I may be into musically at any given time, Sabbath is always there. It's not uncommon for me to follow up a Beatles or a Charlie Parker listening marathon with a quick listen through Sabotage or Master of Reality. Sabbath can pop up in any time, in any context for me. And I'm going to go out on a limb with a controversial statement, but I stand 100% behind it. As far as I'm concerned, to this day, no one has ever out-heavied Black Sabbath. Sure, other bands may play faster with more distortion, with screamier or growlier vocals, and they may play riffs with more tritones per measure, but that doesn't mean heavier. And it's not just the weight of the music. Lyrically, Sabbath expressed the fears, uncertainty, alienation, and rage of the Vietnam-era youth. Songs like War Pigs, Into the Void, Hand of Doom, and Children of the Grave are not passive-aggressive flower power protest tunes. They are full-blown assaults on corrupt military, industrial, and religious institutions. True protest tunes. Now, I discovered Sabbath when I was 13. I had just gotten my first decent electric guitar, and I spent every day after school playing Drop the Needle and learning anything that would stick. Now, if you're new to Sabbath, Paranoid would probably be the album to start with. It's the one that has Paranoid, War Pigs, and Iron Man. So most folks probably already know almost half the record. So what's my favorite Black Sabbath album? Well, it's a toss-up between Master of Reality and Sabotage. Psst, I think it's Sabotage. Also, keep in mind, you can never go wrong with the first 6 Sabbath records. That being said, the Dio albums are really excellent, and Born Again with Deep Purple's Ian Gillan is an underrated masterpiece. Now, some of my favorite bands didn't make the top 10, but I feel compelled to mention. And they're Cheap Trick, Susie and the Banshees, The Angels, Skeletal Family, The Who, Supertramp, and Claw 2. Remember, please like, share, and subscribe if you're enjoying some of the topics I'm addressing. Hit the notification bell so you'll always know when new episodes come online. And feel free to leave comments or any suggestions for things you might like to see in future videos. My name's Dave Holland, and thanks for watching String 'em Up. Have fun, stay safe, and see you next time. Bye.